Hey YouTube. Welcome to this tutorial where we will be covering how to install the Traefik reverse proxy on NixOS. Traefik is a modern HTTP reverse proxy and load balancer that is designed to make the deployment of microservices as easy as possible. Now, why Traefik on NixOS specifically? Well, you are about to see how NixOS's declarative configuration model is a perfect match for Traefik's architecture. So let's dive into it. There are a couple of important concepts that you need to know when you start working with Traefik. First of all, there are entry points. These are network entry points into Traefik. Essentially, these are the ports Traefik is listening on. So a common example is port 80 for HTTP and port 443 for HTTPS. Then we have routers. The routers examine requests and they ultimately decide which service should take care of the incoming request. And routers in Traefik are rule-based. That means they use host names, headers, and more to get the routing done correctly. And then we have middlewares. Middlewares are kind of interesting because they are able to modify requests that are coming in or going out of Traefik. So for example, you could add authentication as a middleware or modify headers or redirecting traffic, let's say, from HTTP to HTTPS automatically. And then, of course, there is services, and these are actually the services that are running on your server. So this can be any kind of service that is running on the machine itself, or it could be a service that is provided by a Docker container. That doesn't really matter for Traefik. And another important concept of Traefik is providers. And these are basically the configurations that define how Traefik discovers services. So for example, in our case on NixOS, we pretty much use the file provider, but there are also other providers, for example, the Docker provider, that enables configuring traffic routing just by using labels in a Docker Compose configuration, for example. For this video, I have created a basic NixOS configuration here, and I will share the code in the description as usual, so it's easy enough for you to follow along. And as you can see, this is a very basic flake, so we create a configuration. In this case, I named it M3 Zelda. And here we refer to the M3 Zelda module in the hosts folder. So the configuration part for the server itself kind of takes place in the host folder with the host name here. And I don't want to talk about too much about the basics, because if you've followed my NixFlex series, this will look very familiar to you. What we are having here is we have a default.nix in this folder, and this will basically import the configuration.nix, which holds the base configuration for the system, where we have something like time zone, user configuration, SSH, authorized keys, and so on and so forth. And then we import services, and that's the main folder we will be working with today. And in the services folder, I have a default.nix that imports the folder containers. The containers folder will hold configuration files for Docker containers, and here I have a Traefik.nix file. And as you can see, the Traefik.nix file right now is very basic, so we just refer to services, Traefik, and then enable equals true. And I already have prepared my server configuration, so I can just push this configuration to my server here. And now you can see NixOS is reporting the following new units were started, Traefik.service. And then I log into my remote server here, and then I can just check for the service. So sudo systems ctl status, and then we have Traefik.service. And you can see Traefik is up and running. And of course, right now, this doesn't do very much because we didn't configure anything. So let's dive into the configuration of Traefik here. When it comes to Traefik configuration, we have actually two parts. We have a static configuration, and this configuration is dependent on a restart of Traefik. So anything that is in the static configuration And when there are changes made, this will require a restart. And then there is a dynamic configuration, and this one will not require a restart and change. And for now, I will just start with the static configuration. So first of all, I want to enable logging here, and I will just set the log level to 1. And then we can just enable the API. And this will allow us to use the Traefik dashboard, for example. So we can later on create a route and a subdomain for the Traefik dashboard where we have an overview about all the routers and middlewares we are configuring in Traefik here. And as I said before, Traefik needs to have configured entry points. So first of all, we need to configure an entry point so Traefik knows what to listen on. And in this case, I just want to create 2 entry points. So we can just put entry points here. And we have one entry point for web, which listens on port 80, and another one for web secure, which will listen to port 443. So we have HTTP up here and HTTPS down here. And as really no one is using insecure HTTP connections, we can just as well redirect directly from HTTP to HTTPS. So we are sure that any connection will be encrypted. And as we are using 2 ports here, and NixOS has enabled the firewall by default, we of course need to open the ports to the firewall here. And that is done with networking firewall allow TCP ports, and then the list of the ports I want to open here. And as we want to have Traefik manage our SSL certificates for us, we will need to set up a certificate resolver, and I have prepared one in advance here, and I will just go through it with you so you can understand what this does. So I have configured a certificate resolver for GoDaddy, and within that certificate resolver, we have Acme here, which will hold the configuration that we need in order to use Let's Encrypt. So for example, here I have my email that is submitted to Let's Encrypt as the contact for the certificates here. And then as storage, we have defined the acme.json file where the certificates will be stored. And here we have the server for the certificate authority. And down here, I configure a DNS challenge, and I use GoDaddy as a provider. And here we have the resolvers that are used to verify the DNS entries for the domains so we can obtain the certificate. And down here, I have added a propagation delay before checks because GoDaddy tends to be a little bit slow sometimes. So the checks oftentimes fail without a delay here. And when we have a look here into the Traefik documentation, you can see there are many different providers here we can use to get the DNS challenge done, and GoDaddy is just one of them. And one common one, for example, is, let's see, Cloudflare. So you can just use any provider in this list to get the DNS challenge done. So the big advantage for using a DNS challenge here is that we don't need to set up DNS records manually. What is done in the background is we provide API credentials for GoDaddy to Traefik, and Traefik will be able to add temporary text records to our DNS settings on our domains. And then we can verify the ownership by checking for these values here and obtain the certificates for our domains. And in order to provide credentials to Traefik, we need to provide an environment file to the Traefik servers, and that is very easily done in NixOS. So we can just define systemd services Traefik.service config, and here we have environment file, and in this case I will just refer to a file in var lib Traefik/env, which will be our environment file. And there are multiple ways to provide this file. So for example, we could log into our server and just create the file and save it there, and that will be good enough for the Traefik servers to obtain the credentials it needs for GoDaddy. Or what we can do, and what I have done in this example here, is I will just use an activation script. And this is just a simple bash script, and that will run on activation of a new system configuration. So each time NixOS rebuild command rebuilds the system and activates the configuration, it will run this script, and this will just create a simple text file in our var.lib Traefik folder. And as you can see here, this will just hold the GoDaddy credentials, and this way we can provide it easily to Traefik. Please note, this does not fall into proper secrets management on NixOS. Usually I would use something like HNix to encrypt my secrets here, but that's kind of out of the scope of this video. And I've covered this in multiple other videos. I will link them down below. There you can learn how you can encrypt your secrets so they are not openly readable in your configuration or in your file system. And now we can start building out our dynamic configuration. So we will set up just our first router, and this router will be for the Traefik dashboard, so we can have an overview about all the routers and services running. And the router structure is kind of simple. Here we have routers, and we define a router that is named API. And here we have a rule that will look for a specific host name, and this will route to the internal API service of Traefik. And we use the entry point web secure, which is our HTTPS traffic. And for the certificate resolver, we refer to GoDaddy that we have set up here. And now I can just save this configuration and push it over to our server once more. So I just execute the NixOS rebuild command here. And now the system configuration has been rebuilt, and log back into my server again. And as you can see, Traefik is running as before. And now I can just copy my subdomain to the clipboard and check if the dashboard is available. You can see the Traefik dashboard is available, and just let me make it a little bit bigger here. So up here we have the router section, and as you can see here, we got our Traefik dashboard here over the web secure entry point, and we have a TLS certificate for this one. And now, as you can see, Traefik is up and running, and it automatically obtained the certificate for us. And right now this dashboard is available to the public. So what I can do now is I can just create a middleware for authentication in order to secure this dashboard so it's not accessible by everyone on the internet. And in order to get authentication, I can just put a middleware into my dynamic configuration here, and I name this one auth for authentication. And this is a basic authentication that will just be a username and a password. And as you can see here, I have my username, and here I have my encrypted password. And of course, in order to have our router use the authentication, I will need to refer to the middlewares here, and you can attach multiple middlewares to a router, and in this case, this is of course just the only one. And now I can just save the configuration once more, and now we can rebuild our system configuration. And when I head back to my dashboard, you can see I am asked for my username here, and in this case, I think I just made it 12345. And now I can use my dashboard again. And now we can basically just start adding any service we would like here. So we can use NixOS services just from the NixOS options on nixos.org, or we can just define Docker containers and create dynamic routing here for all of them. And the good part is when you have it set up like this with an DNS challenge, you don't need to log into your domain provider every time to set up subdomains and so on and so forth. And this will basically all be handled by Traefik automatically. And the good part here is, as we have the declarative approach of NixOS, this will just built with the system configuration. So you can very easily make changes and push them to your machines, and everything will be taken care of for you. So let's define a simple Docker container, and for this example, I will just use a service named slash. That is a free and open source URL shortener. And I have also prepared this configuration a little bit. So what we are doing here is we are creating an OCI container named slash, and we refer to a Docker image here, and here we do our port assignments. So we will assign the internal container port 5231 to our host port 3010. And here we just define a volume for our container. And of course, we need to import this file because in the default.nix in our services, we were already importing containers. But in the default.nix within the containers folder, we need to import /.nix in this case. And what I also would like to do is add a little bit of podman configuration. So in my services folder, I will just create a podman.nix file and add some podman configuration. And this is basically just enabling podman and enable Docker compatibility. So we can just use the podman or the Docker command. It doesn't really matter when we have this enabled. And just for my configurations, I always set up auto prune, so anything that is not needed will be deleted automatically. Down here, I usually enable DNS for the container networks. And I will also add podman compose to my system packages so we can work with Docker compose files here. And of course, in my default.nix, I will need to import podman.nix. Now I add the new files and rebuild my system configuration once more. And now I can head back to my server and just have a look if any containers are running on the server. And as you can see, the slash container is up and running. And as the containers we define in our configuration in NixOS are managed by systemd, we can also use the systemctl status command. And now you can see the slash service is up and running. And we are ready to use it. And of course, this container is not yet exposed to the world because we had our Traefik configuration here. And we also deliberately opened just two firewall ports, which were port 80 and port 443. So now we need to define and set up a router and a service for our Traefik configuration. So we are able to obtain a certificate for our service and get everything routed correctly. And the good part is when you manage this in NixOS, you can basically add the Traefik configuration to the Nix module where you have defined the containers. And that makes it really easy to have everything that belongs together in one place. I have also prepared this configuration here, and what we are basically defining here is we kind of hook into the dynamic configuration options under HTTP. And here we define a new service. So we define services.slash and we define a load balancer in this case. And here we just refer to the internal URL. So that is the localhost on port 3010. And then we just define a router here. So here we have a hostname rule. So we set the subdomain here to /.tr and so on and so forth. And define the cert resolver, in this case GoDaddy, to automatically obtain certificates and create a subdomain here. And we refer to the service slash, which is defined up here. And we use the HTTPS entry point in this case. And now we can rebuild our system configuration once more. And now everything is rebuilt. And I will just quickly get our subdomain here and have a look if it's available. And you can see the service is available and exposed to the world. And we have a secure connection. And of course, we have a valid SSL certificate that we obtained automatically with Traefik in this case. As you can see in this simple example, Traefik and NixOS are a very powerful combination. And of course, Traefik also comes with a lot of nice features when it comes to providers. So for example, if you don't use NixOS, you can easily just use container labels when you work with a Docker provider. But from my point of view, I find it very nice that I can set up everything in my NixOS configuration and I don't need to worry about config files, especially not writing YAML, because I'm not a big fan of YAML, to be honest. Having a configuration like this makes adding new services to something like minutes. Of course, you can route any service that is available on Nix packages with Traefik, and that makes it very easy and very powerful. So that was a short introduction on Traefik and NixOS, and I hope this will help you to get your Traefik configuration up and running, especially when you are self-hosting a couple of services on your own servers. This becomes very handy and helpful. If you like content like this, please like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.